Good afternoon. Yeah. Sí. Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much for being here. First of all, I want to thank Tania Bruguera and her wonderful team, all the Cuban people here and the people around the world. Uh, Thank you, Tania, for the invitation to present my work here. And thank you also for being possible the presence of the Cuban art, contemporary art, and the links between art and politics in Documenta Castle. I want to thank also my university, la Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana, for supporting me to get here to Castle. The title of my paper, as you can see there, I don't know if you can see there at the blackboard, is the racialization process surrounding el movimiento San Isidro, vigilance strategies from art and politics. Every time I speak, I like to stop and emphasize the idea that there are strong connections in terms of meaning between the art sphere and socio-political content in Cuba, at least in terms of the artistic works developed by those creators gathering around el Movimiento San Isidro. Mostly Luis Manuel Otero Alcántara, to whom I will be devoting this presentation. They are curatorial practice, they are cultural practices and curatorial also, have plenty of nuances we need to be aware of. Otherwise, we will miss the complexities these visual practices are conveying. When I talk about these complexities, I'm not talking about the task of analyzing or writing about artistic works, and also referring to a variety of social conditions that are profoundly involved in the material as well as the very symbolic processes of artistic creation in Cuba. The contemporary Cuban art sphere is a paradoxical one. Cuban artists have had the possibility to receive a very high level of education founded in a conceptual and theoretical formation in the visual arts. At the same time, the Cuban Revolution has forged the narrative of its own conquest carefully. That's why there are certain topics the citizens are not permitted to discuss openly. But I would say that if we review some of the artistic works in Cuba, we'll be surprised about how some of our artists have taken the risk to expose those problematic issues censored by the state. My main focus as a researcher and as an art historian has been the discussion around the topics of racism, politics, and art. Visual practices such as the one developed by Luis Manuel Otero tackle those themes with an emphasis on rewriting the hegemonic narrative of the Cuban state, and they've been doing it even before the emergence of El Movimiento San Isidro. These presentations raises questions about how these artists are making visible the intricate manifestation of the government's political strategies in relation to various domains in Cuban's lives. This artistic work discuss the government imposed limitation on spaces like the public sphere, race, and the artistic and theoretical languages used to talk about art. I would also like to discuss how the state cultural policies are intertwined with the way artistic and political life is experienced in Cuba. It is important to recall that El Movimiento San Isidro was strengthened after the so-called 3049 decree created by the state cultural ministry to repress the artist's work and decide who gets to make art and exhibit art in the country. In other words, I want to produce links between political censorship, race, archive, and nation narrative as a way to grasp the variety of these Cuban art practices, but also to shed light on how the emergence of a movement like El Movimiento San Isidro, which is not also an artistic organization but civic, has allowed to show the state's systematic signs of racialization thrust upon the Cuban people, not only by means of skin tone, and this is very important for the premise I said in relation, the premise I figured it out in relation to the process of racialization in Cuba, not only by means of skin tone, but also via strategies such as marginalization, empowerment, the criminalization of protests, and the strict vigilance of their citizens, among other issues I'm gonna develop in my presentation. This is shown clearly with how the state systematically deploys tactical and pedagogical narrative to obscure the mechanism that originated the so-called Cuban nation, which of course include, amongst other things, the racialization of a big part of the population. The relation between race and nation has shaped the topography of discourses in the narrative that describe the historical trajectory of Cuba. Since the very first attempts of imagining the nation appear, the variable of race, specifically the black race, emerged as a counterpoint or as a destabilizing vortex that privilege a white Hispanic origin for Cubanness. Very frequently and throughout various different historical periods, the anxiety to erase the cultural weight and the presence of the Black population in Cuba has become a political practice that is both excluding and stigmatizing. This discourse has become normalized and naturalized within the hegemonic political sphere. The 1959 Cuban Revolution brought about indisputable achievement in many fields of social development. However, it did not succeed in altering the legacy of historic and racial inequalities. In fact, it exacerbated the problem when the government decided to interdict all the religious practices and certain cultural manifestation of Afro descendants in the country at the very beginning of the revolution. One of the ways in which this happened is Fidel Castro interdict in 1962, where he proclaimed the end of racist conflicts in Cuba thanks to the triumph of the revolution. The censorship to talk about these topics created a mark that deepened the problem regarding racism and generated the source of even new and more complex manner of reproducing racist ideologies and practices. The locus where I position myself as a researcher to analyze these cultural practices are the post-colonial studies. That is to say, the emphasis is not on the transit towards a new historic period, meaning post-colonial, as a period of time that has been left behind, but by rather placing the emphasis on deployment, mutation, and permanency of colonial violence tool during the contemporary conformation of our independent and modern nations. In this way, the claims for new formats of social mobility and citizenship, socio-political spaces, emergent subjectivities, as well as critical perspective about the management of historical difference find in this conceptual twist the possibility of debating collective prints of dissent, disaffection, and the questioning of patterns imposed by everyday life in Cuba specifically. With this in mind, Cuban history after 1959 is not an exception. Since then, the ideological apparatuses of Cuban socialism were given the task of transmitting to the public the idea that Cuba had begun to be a nation state. Hence, from the 60s to the 80s, almost all historical texts produced by the cultural discourses, the social science, the media, and the educational institution of Cuba's socialism added meanings to the official narrative around the island past. According to this narrative, before 1959, Cuba had lived under a prolonged colonial condition, with the emergency of Fidel Castro representing the dream of independence come true, the national project fantasies of refounding a homogeneous and revolutionary political subject passed through the mimetic discipline of that other, the one who thought differently, the one who disagreed, the racial other, the sexual other, the religious other, the abject, who with his excesses could put in danger the fragile and urgent authority of the state discourse. All of these topographies of difference are the symbolic means where Luis Manuel Otero's work and the civic duties of El Movimiento San Isidro are grounded. In resonance with this, El Movimiento San Isidro took the streets to question not only the state artistic institution, but also the judicial system, the state's repressive institutions, including the military and the police, and many other instances of power. It also allowed them to associate with organizations that were sanctioned by the state as dissident and to reclaim human and civic rights, which are some of the places where the regime plants their flag. What all this favor was the creation of a type of activism that mixed public art and civic protest, and in the process displays the liminalities, but also the connivence between the official art institute and political power. What interests me the most about Otero art form and civic protest are the bonds he produced around the public sphere, not only because of the historical and political implications that can be made around the public space, but also because of the specific ways in which it has been narrated by the state. It's been the locus to assert repression, to marginalize and racialize, in other words, to produce the bodies of difference. As claimed by anthropologist Rita Segato, and I quote, race is not an intrinsic quality of the racialized subject, or more specifically, of the subject organism, but a way to evaluate that is rooted in the gaze that falls upon him. End of the quotation. Amongst the different political identities that comprise contemporary Cuba, being blank means showing the multiplex layers of a systematic exercise of subalternization that belies the usual setting or national unity put forward by the state's discourse. Otero's words gain significance considering the fact that historically artistic public manifestation of political dissident have been marred by very rigid regulations and the impositions of a firm state oversight. In order to locate Otero's artwork, and his production of the public space as a notion full of nuances and tensions, I would like to draw a brief overview of certain historical twists that have been occurring in the last year on the street of Havana City. In August 2015, we witnessed a lot of political changes in Cuba, also in 2016. The main focus of my attention in a list of remarkable facts is the controversial Chanel before. It's a controversial Chanel fashion show that took place in the legendary Paseo del Prado, one of the most important avenues in old Havana. Precisely for my research perspective, the image that have circulated about the Chanel show are the source of a productive counterpoint between the pedagogy of the nation narrative after 1959. It was and still is attempting to erase all historical traces before of the pre-Cuban Revolution era and the contradictions and contingencies of the Cubans' everyday life. If we follow the reflected premises of the revolution along these past 53 years, there is no doubt that Chanel fashion show was controversial, to say the least. Not only due to the high cost of the costume offer, prohibitive for the Cuban people, but let's be honest, also for almost everybody in the world. The event doesn't even hold a bond with the fact that our streets were full of famous stars from Hollywood, suggesting that maybe all of this is a part of the anachronistic idea circulating internationally about the island, which perpetuate the well-known image of the economic decline caused by Cuban socialism. But, but what we were really seeing in those disturbing images were the tensions, paradoxes, and ambivalence that they reveal in relation to the national discourse of the Cuban Revolution. For this narrative, the public space and public sphere were and continue to be their strongest and most guarded trench. Ironically, it seems at the same time and running in parallel, they produce the narrative that the public space is a place for the common good, one of consensus. Indeed, all the rhetorical devices generated by the revolutionary narrative that were meant to break away from the pre-1959 period, all the nation ghosts were symbolically displayed in the Chanel show. The exotic and colorful island, a kind of tropical paradise, our landscape and architecture, mainly those that leave our history frozen in the Republican periods past, are being taken as iconic elements. All cars from the 50 carry the star from the National Hotel, a very good example of the Republican period architectural code, to El Paseo del Prado. Our leaders and their families were taking part in this social privilege performance as the new wealthy group, just like those groups from a high social class that were photographed for magazines forbidden by the government since 1959. This was certainly an image that crushed the official rhetoric and the purpose of its pedagogy based on the dispute with the bad habits and social backwardness of the island past. What is even more pitiful was the government's decision to place a police barricade around El Paseo del Prado to prevent the Cuban population from attending the show. Once again, an image that contrasted with the Cuban conga, drums, musicians, dancers in charge of the show closing ceremony. A few days later, similar dancers wearing the Cuban flag wearing the Cuban flag as a custom fit costume, exoticized and racialized bodies received the passengers from Crucero Adonia, the first cruise ship from the USA to enter the country since 1959. On one hand, the spectacle of the party, and on the other, the naturalization of the historical difference, both of them enhancing the persistence of the colonial violence in the contemporary island human landscape. This same violence was now being orchestrated by the decision of the Cuban revolutionary state. Undoubtedly, those blunt facts compel us to take a critical stance at the side of our history's narratives The production of archive and the renewal stands at the side of our sorry, and the renewal, of colonizing practices by our own mother nation states. In doing this, we disrupt the rationality of this perversive logic of making archive by occluding and burying the contradictions, the anomalies, the deviations, the remains, and the excesses that haven't found a place in the classificatory mechanism and political commandments of our government. By systematically shutting down public discussions on these topics, the archive silence deepened furthermore, and the mechanism of censorship were lubricated, thus provoking a profound social paralysis. The debate concerning this public discussion interlaces with the artistic creation. In Cuba, the arts have been boosted by the works of certain artists revisiting the memory of the present, traveling across the archive of the nation and damaging them under the signs of indiscipline and suspicion. It would not be far-fetched to say that the artistic proposal we are reviewing here and in this very exhibition in Documenta Castle might function as one of the most original, critical, and contingent archive of contemporary Cuba. At the same time, this debate allows us to explore the tension between the specific of the nation and its representations, as well as between the documents and, in their widest sense, their analysis. The precise relevance of this artistic proposal is their insistence in pointing out the ghostly things hidden by the archive. These ghostly things rather trespass the frontiers of time, and in this way, they repel the historical period in which the narrative of the nation state are being built. The artistic works of Otero have taken the public space to explore sensitive issues that are rarely discussed in an open way on the island. By doing this, he appropriates the same rhetoric devices of the Cuban socialism policies, which have been focusing in the rescue of national sovereignty and the decolonization of the country. From this standpoint, Otero interrogates how can we negotiate with the legitimization tools of the Cuban nation state and its archiving practices. How can we recover public spaces and the narrative of divergent memories confiscated by the dramaturgy of power relations through by the cloak of suspicion of the official history? According to the conceptual and political map that I have charted here, Otero's procedure provides clear evidence of the fragility of the rhetorical practices that the state presents as if it were flawless and immutable. Otero emphasized the link between the formal materiality of his artistic approach and its topic formulations. Hence, his interventions in the public space are ephemeral, and his recycled materials potentiate the symbolically physical and metaphorical assumptions. In doing so, he ties together the different meanings in his creative practice. His performances and objects take place in public space without the authorities' approval and therefore are always subject to censorship. The social construction of public space, a disputed territory, and the police interference sheltering the state's interests take part in the complex bargaining processes and the construction of meaning through the artistic gesture. I'm going to skip here all the explanation or the analysis around the Luis Manuel Otero's work. I'm going to focus maybe here in this work, in this performance, Donde está Mella? Donde está Mella from 2017, a performance in which Otero shows up at the opening of Giorgio Gucci Luxury Boutique in the inauguration, inauguration of the Kempinski Hotel. This hotel was built on a traditional block from the old Havana known as La Manzana de Gomez. Otero wasn't there to snoop around and see all the objects that he couldn't afford. He was there to raise a question: where's Mella? La Manzana de Gomez block is an important symbol of Art Deco architecture from the Republican period and was altered by the revolutionary government with a sculpture of Julio Antonio Mella, the founder of the Communist Party in 1925. With this question, Otero shed light on the fact that the sculpture was removed at precisely the same time that the government opened the economy to foreign investment. This incomprehensive procedure contradicted the daily state's official statements. Inevitably, the awkward and incisive presence of the artist wearing Mella's photograph on his face led to his incarceration. Is there any other possible development in the nation narrative other than the one that follows the state's guidelines? Otero entered into these artistic, institutional, historical, and political loopholes, allowing other traces and other narratives to arise. Therefore, he enables the construction of another archive in between the liminal spaces of the Cuban nation-state power relations. The disruptive presence of Otero artistic practices in the public space changed the univocal sense of the practices and at the same time questions them. He constructs and simultaneously deconstructs collective memory, approaching the mid-referential frame of the island last 63 years of history with a hint of irony. Sadly, some of these questions have been answered and not in a favorable way for the future of the island, and especially not for Otero, neither for Michael Osorbo, nor El Movimiento San Isidro altogether. Granted that both these futures, that is, the island and these artists, I consider to be intertwined. While making the final adjustment for this presentation, it was brought to my attention just a couple of days back that after a year in prison for participating in the protest of July 11, Otero has been sentenced by the state to serve 5 years in jail. The sentence was delivered not because of his involvement in such protests, but because of an artistic performance initiated during 2019 named Drapeau, or 24-hour with the flag as my second skin, where he used the Cuban flag as a way to critique and subvert the way in which the state not only values but also imposes a determined meaning on its national icons, such as the flag. His performance and later imprisonment created a social network movement called La Bandera es de Todo, which translates the flag is everybody's, which consisted in sharing pictures of people with the flag in different situations to protest against state rule called the National Symbols Rule, aimed to constrain the narrative around the nation's icons. This citizen manifestation through social network ignited a commentary about the diverse meaning that symbols can communicate and how the people should be involved in their construction, which is one of the central premises of Otero's work. But also, this shows the way in which a totalitarian state such as the Cuban tends to render a great deal of importance to the control of meaning as a key gesture for political domination. When I think of Luis Manuel Otero's Black, male, and Cuban body, and the ways he pushes the limits and flirts with ambiguity, I think about his being using to subvert the meaning typically assigned to these types of bodies by rewriting the precarious and historical ways in which the state tends to erase, social complexities, and everyday questions involving critical thinking. Thank you very much. If you have questions, this is the moment.
Hi. Who? No? Hello. Hi, Yissel. Well, it was in the very short in a marathon and amazing extract that you make about this condition, but it's very interesting because you are talking about here about performatic actions in the public space, especially when you start to speak about Chanel and uh, and those. How can I say gentrified way to see the fashion in Havana. So it remind me that the place when the event occurred, which is Paseo del Prado, which is a place that was made by the General Machado. um, he restored the Paseo del Prado, but he enacted new monuments and new things that you can see, like the benches and everything. So it was like a kind of a monument to the Republic that end up in the Capitolio. So at the same time, it's a place where Luis Manuel make many of these performance. Not only Donde está Mella, that he was close to the Museo Nacional de Bellas Artes in front of the Manzana de Gómez, but
And
also
even close to El Paseo del Prado.
but also when they make with the him and Janelis, they made the first protest against the decree 349, 349, and you know that she covered with excrement in front of the Capitolio. It's a place full of symbolic meanings to Cubans because Capitolio, as you may know, as many Cubans know, is the 0 point of Havana. Is the place when they also occur the main focus of the protest of the 11th of July. People gathering there, and then they were protesting from Prado until San Lázaro. And it's also is a place with the unfortunately protagonist of a collapse of the Saratoga building. So
Exactly.
so it's a place full of meanings, this one that you were taking. And it's a place full of this charge of this ambivalence of what is the Cuban propaganda and Cuban stereotype of a place where it's forbidden for many people sometimes, a place that's many times is full of police, a place where is the National Assembly of the government, and the place when it's exercised the violence, and also the place when it was this Pacific protest, the 11th of May of 2019, when the LGTB community in Cuba, they were protest, and also they were repressed. I was there, so
that.
I was there, so I can tell you, I saw how really harsh repression was exercised there at the 11th of July. So my 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 question is to see how is understanding this performatization in the civic uh, in the civic space, which is sometimes doing by activists or like artists, group of activism, but at the same time, a kind of performatization of the government. You see the white hierarchy there, the familia, the Castro families there, assisting to the Karl Lagerfeld display, but not everybody can go to that place. So it's very interesting. If I not remember, also there was also a performance of Arte Calle once with the cake, or it was a Juansi, I don't remember, in the same Paseo del Prado.
I don't remember right now.
Some people mix it with something that happened in Parque G, but anyway. Anyway, we're talking about very minimum things about Cuban art history, but also some activists. So the interesting thing how this performatization is enacted in the other way to increase their segregation against the society, and the other way how is a space also of liberalization, a space of performatic emancipation, if we can call it like that. So I just wanted you talk a little bit more about that because you have a half an hour more.
Yes,
I
it's
hope that
interesting.
I hope that somebody make more questions.
Is a very sharp question because what I have to I'm trying to take the El Paseo del Prado as a kind of archive because when we think in the archive, we always think in a kind of place where we put some documents, some papers. But the way that we are rewriting the Cuban history after 1959, a history that is how can I say, that is imprisoned, no, by the official rhetoric, and the way that the civic movement and the way that the artistic some artistic creations are rewriting the possibility of revisiting the archive, thinking in the archive in this way, as a contingent archive, And for me, when I saw the images around this Karl Lagerfeld parade, exactly the Chanel parade, I was astonished, and I wanted to make a kind of tension between the image of the police, for avoiding that the Cuban people could see the Chanel fashion show, and those people, the family of the leaders of the Cuban Revolution, they're sitting, even to be there, they have to pay. I don't know if they have to pay, but they sell the entrances to be there sitting at the bench in the public space. Although the public space is not exactly the street, the public space is always a space in dispute. There's a public space, el Paseo del Prado, and they sell the entrance to be there. I think $300 or something like this. I don't know if they exactly pay the entrances, but it is a very contradictory data, no? According to the official rhetoric, according to the official narrative of the revolution, no?
I have a question. I have a
Yes,
que-
I don't. If you
I
speak
have
louder, please,
I
because
I have a question. Um, I wonder, why is it so difficult for people who are outside of Cuba to understand what you were talking about today, like the racialization, the discrimination of Black and poor people? Why do you think this is happening, even among the art world, which supposedly sometimes has more access to specific stories? No.
exactly, because this is a very hard topic, because very difficult to understand if you don't understand the complexity of the Cuban history after 1959. As I said in the paper, the fact that the government took the decision to prohibit it, the Afro-Cuban religious manifestation, for instance, until 1991. uh, this is something very very polemic in our history, because it's they have the official rhetoric, they have to invent it, a kind of narrative for our identity as a Cuban people, with the ideal part of the Afro-Cuban culture, without the religious practices. They frozen our identity in this kind of exoticization around the Afro-Cuban culture, and by the other hand, by the other way, they prohibited all these manifestations, together with the polemic decision to said Fidel said in a speech in 1962, that we don't have to deal anymore with racism, with the racial conflict, because in Cuba the racism was was superated. And remember that on 1961, las palabras de los intelectuales, has a very close connection with the PM, the documentary that those creators, Saba and the other one, I remember the name, Orlando Jimenez, they made a free cinema documentary trying to reflect or trying to express the life in Havana City during the night. And there's a lot of images of Black people dancing, getting drunk, of course, and that, digamos, that was the origin of the famous sentence at the end of Fidel's speech, against the revolution, nothing; with the revolution, everything. A kind of political cultural premise that functions until today. And the the impossibility of people are outside Cuba to understand the complex situation around the racism in Cuba has to be, I guess, has to be also with the idea that the revolutionary narrative produced an imaginary that the racial conflict in Cuba was separated. Not that we, as a Cuban people, as in our everyday Cuban life, in the the reality of the island, all these problems around the not only the color of the skin, because the idea that I have in relation with the process of racialization is beyond the color of the skin. It has a connection with the position of the state controlling everything, the practice of empowerment, the practice of vigilance around our life, as a whole. I don't know if I answered any other questions. Thank you very much for
Thank
the
you.
invitation, and thank you very much for remaining here.